Barry Hottmann is the Community Development Educator for the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. He's been with the Division of Extension for 3 years. His area of focus includes leadership development, community organizing, and community economic development. In his extension role, he helps and creates partnerships with people in county, state, federal, and tribal governments, community organizations, volunteers, business, and industry to build capacity and establish common goals reflected in our commitment to our communities. So thank you very much for being with us today, Barry, and take it away.
All right, can you hear me okay, Katie?
Yes.
All right, thanks everyone for being here today. I appreciate it. Sorry for the confusion. I'm trying to be a presenter in this one and also help coordinate access to all the other Zooms. So it's a little bit of a debacle right now, but we're doing our best to keep everything moving forward. So thanks, Katie, for the introduction. As Katie mentioned, I do community development in Iowa County is my area of focus. Today, I want to talk a little bit about population trends, aging population, et cetera. It's probably not a mystery that in many areas around our country, and certainly here in Wisconsin, we're experiencing an aging population. And that's definitely the case here in many of our more rural counties in Southwest Wisconsin. So in the little bit of time I have with you today, I want to share with you some data and some trends, but also encourage you to think about some things as it relates to how this may impact some of your organization's initiatives, potentially action plans as you move forward, and certainly outreach to landowners in this region. Unfortunately, there's no hard and fast data that we have that we can maybe correlate some of these, this data that I'll present and its relationship to conservation in general. Yet we can certainly make some discussions and hopefully have some discussion around it. So I'm going to jump right in. Hopefully we'll have maybe about 10 minutes here at the end that we can have some discussion and certainly questions and comments. So I'm going to jump into this first slide. So this is showing population trends from 1990 to 2030. I'm going to show you these graphs and bar charts rather briefly and go through them quickly. Dane County, Grant County, Greene County, Iowa County, and Lafayette County are the counties that I chose to include in this. And whenever you include Dane County in some of these examples, it definitely towers and dominates over the other counties. So I'm going to, Dane County continues to be one of the fastest growing counties in the state, and it certainly is having impact in neighboring counties, especially in the counties of Greene, Northern Greene, I should say in particular, and Eastern Iowa County. So I'm going to go to the next slide that is going to have a little bit different look. So I took Dane County out of it, and obviously makes everything look a little bit different. What's interesting is the amount of sometimes urban pressure that a county like Dane, that is so large and growing so fast, can have on some of these rural adjacent counties, in particular Greene and Iowa. And what was interesting, Dan Veeroff, who works for the Applied Population Lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, is the individual that shared with me a lot of this data. And as I first looked at it to have a conversation with him, I felt it was pretty interesting to see, in particular in Greene and Iowa County, the jump in population in the decade of 2020 to 2030. And immediately, showing my ignorance in that I don't do population data analysis on a regular basis, I thought, wow, I wonder if any of that has to do with a current pandemic situation, that somehow that's been calculated into it. Because on a side note, I recently completed a broadband survey in Iowa County. It ended in October of last year, and still doing some analysis on it. But I had an opportunity to have some conversations and whatnot with individuals that responded to the survey. And it was interesting to hear how many people had looked at going to more rural counties, getting away from densely populated. And some people actually had land and rural homes in addition to maybe something in a metropolitan area, and were choosing to quarantine, if you will, in some of their rural settings. So anyways, moving on. Just population, I mean, in 2030, we'll be eclipsing 700,000 people in these 5 counties. So that's pretty significant. Granted, a lot of it's driven, again, by Dane. So the next slide talks about natural increase in net migration. It requires a little bit of an explanation if you're not familiar with those 2 terms. So natural increase is the amount of births and deaths that occur, and everything above the black line at 0 is obviously more births than deaths. And net migration is the difference between the amount of people that move into an area versus those who move out of an area. So in particular, if you look at Wisconsin, Wisconsin has a positive natural increase and not a huge, but it's still positive net migration. And if you look at, for example, Grant, Greene, Iowa, Lafayette, in particular, I'd say Greene, Iowa, and Lafayette, you'll see that there is a natural increase in those 3 counties. And it varies the different reasons as to maybe why there's some natural increase. So for example, in Iowa County, you have a lot of, I think, people that have moved into the county, maybe live here, raising some families here, but may not work here. That's why our net migration numbers are different. Same way in Lafayette County, there's obviously I shouldn't say obviously, but there is a large Latino population, and they are raising families, and that is a natural, that is why you will see a natural increase in Lafayette County. So moving on. If you look at the next graph, I'm showing you the selected age groups from 2010 to 2020. And the population segment that I want to focus on is the age 65 and older. And why this is interesting, it goes back to us having a aging population in our Southwest Wisconsin counties and in this region. But for those of you that may know, Cindy completed 2 surveys in 2020 in regards to, one was a stakeholder survey and one was a landowner survey. And what was interesting from the landowner survey is that 82% of the respondents, and I think it was roughly almost 100 or just shy of 100, were in the ages of 54 and older. And 64% of those respondents were retired or residential landowners. So as we look at opportunities potentially for Southern Grasslands or other conservation organizations, it seems that there may be an opportunity to focus some of our outreach efforts and marketing efforts on this aging subset of population, which is certainly the majority of some of these landowners and family farm owners in this area. And so that's something just to think about as the discussion moves forward here. The next graph is just real quick. If you look at the counties individually, Dane County from 2010 to 2020, 56% increase in by 2020 here with age 65 and older. Iowa County, 47% increase. So there's some significant increases in age 65 and older. You know, the baby boomer generation started turning 65 in 2011. And by 2026, they'll start turning 80. So at least the beginnings of that generation will start turning 80. So it's definitely something to make note of. So this graph is just giving you a better visual understanding of the percent of population age 65 and older, looking at instead 2020 and then what it's going to look like in 2040. So you can see in some of these counties, well, in all of them, but some more than others, there's some certainly significant increases in those age demographics. So as I mentioned, sorry, wrong way. So this is an interesting graphic that I think is important to talk about. So 1 in 5 residents of the Southwest Grassland counties that I'm focusing on here will be age 65. And what's important to point out, from 2010 to 2040, we're almost doubling it from 69,000 individuals to over 150,000. So 1 in 5 by 2040 will be over the age of 65. And that these baby boomers, like I said, by 2026 will be 58,000 residents in these 5 counties. So this is including Dane County. The next slide that I have here does not include Dane County. So it looks similar, not big difference, it's just that the numbers are different. So going back to the surveys that I was talking about, one thing that Cindy asked in the stakeholder survey was about succession planning. And the survey indicated that if stakeholders felt that there wasn't a lot of estate planning and succession planning going on, and that many of the family farms were not staying in the family, and this was due to financial and certainly lifestyle concerns. So there's a number of things that come to mind for me. Is that one, your baby boomers, for example, are living longer. They maybe make more money. They have more active lifestyles. They may look at leisurely activity a little bit different, never too old to do anything kind of philosophy. And they're also the ones in some of these areas that are probably owning the land and maybe some of these family farms. So I feel there's an opportunity maybe for some marketing and outreach within this area for these types of individuals. So one thing that I would ask is, how important is it for an organization like Southwest Grasslands to foster some relationships with these farmers and landowners, especially in this age demographic, and what opportunities for marketing and outreach could be created to help develop these relationships? Another finding of the survey that Cindy had done with the Landowner Survey was that they were asked questions about people's level of confidence and trust in certain organizations related to conservation. And without going into the details, what it indicated is that there's an opportunity to create stronger relationships with these landowners. And what can we do and how can we do that is probably what we should be asking ourselves. Something that Cindy and I talked about is as we look at all these areas, these beautiful grasslands that we're protecting and so on, what can we do to help build awareness around these areas? What can we do to promote these areas? What can we do to make these areas a place that people can recreate? Maybe trails, maybe trail markers that identify birds that are in the area, pollinator areas, those types of things, and make it more of some destinations so people understand the value of the conservation efforts that are going on. But then there's also the opportunity, I think, to reach out to these landowners and family farms and help them understand the importance of including that, taking some of these areas and making them into conservation areas as they move forward in their aging, and if they don't have a succession plan, what can be done. Next slide is again just sharing that Dan Viroff, the Applied Population Lab, is the one that put this together, and a few links here. Other than that, I want to open it up to any questions, comments, etc.
People are willing. Why don't we turn on some of our videos too, so we have a little bit of a partnership meeting going on again. I'm seeing everybody in person, but we'll have to make do for a while yet.
This is Mike Engel. What do we know about tailoring a message to age 65 and older? So what would we do to reach those folks that might be different than what we're currently doing?
Would you say that's a question to me particular, or to those that may be on here within our grasslands, Southern Grasslands Network?
Well, Barry, I know you know everything.
Right.
If you want to chime in and anyone can think of anything to add, that would be all right too.
I don't know everything. You know, in the survey that Cindy had done, it talked about, I'll bring it up. It talked about, I'm not going to bring it up on the screen, but preferred forms of learning for those that responded. Online material and print were first, newspapers and magazines were second, and then farmer to farmer. So I am not privy to all of the ways in which Southern Grasslands or other conservation agencies are doing outreach to their constituents. When I look at online material and print, going back to my earlier discussion of the broadband survey that I was a part of, you know, strong broadband access in Iowa County and all the surrounding counties, especially in the rural landscape, is difficult and challenging. And so online material certainly is convenient, but may not reach everyone that you're looking to reach. I think a in-person opportunity to talk with some of these landowners, and I think Cindy had done some of that in 2020, is never a bad route. In extension, Gene Schrieffer, who's the ag agent, for example, in Iowa County, does a ton of you know, farmer to farmer or person to person interaction that's helping them with their farm practice and whatnot. And I think that could be, obviously it takes time, and obviously it takes people power to be able to find the time to go out and do that. But I think the one-on-one message with some of these landowners and whatnot to help them understand opportunities like succession planning and what it is that you're trying to achieve is certainly something that I would feel would be one of the best ways.
I got a couple. Sorry, I got a couple questions here. So with an aging population, I'm wondering if there's been a shift in community gathering places. So I would think naturally, like a local school district, like the local high school, would typically be a gathering place. But with an aging population, I'd imagine that'd be less of the case. So I'm wondering if there's been new gathering places forming where people gather together. And I also think, generally speaking, and I don't know if the data would bear out on this, but as people age, they tend to probably leave their home less and probably interact with less people in their community. So how much social gathering or social interaction where there's a collective effort to maybe think about these things?
So I'll just make a couple of comments. I don't know if I'm necessarily answering them directly, but you know, in small rural communities, we certainly are trying to find ways to, in my role as a community development educator, find roles to create community gathering spaces. For example, in Dodgeville, obviously not in 2020, but in 2019, we created a pop-up town square that provided opportunities for people to gather. Going back to your question as it relates to schools, I'll just use again, Dodgeville School District in Iowa County just completed a 550 seat auditorium that unfortunately can't be used at this moment, but is certainly looked at as a possibility to pull that aging demographic out by offering performances and whatnot in a dedicated space within the community, and not just for people in Dodgeville, but also the surrounding communities that, you know, maybe within a 50-mile radius. The second part of your question in regards to, what was it? It was, what was your second part of that question?
Well, as people age, I don't necessarily have data on it, but I would just generally speaking think they tend to leave the home less, so they would have less interaction with other people. Has that been a concern?
I'm sure it's a concern, and certainly right now with in 2020 with the pandemic and not some of the unknowns moving forward, it's certainly a concern. I think not only their age, but their susceptibility to potentially catching any viruses, or, you know, and not just COVID-19, but certainly flu and other things that it certainly does slow people down, I think, from going outside their home.
Barry, a couple of thoughts too. You know, just thinking about my parents and other friends facing retirement, though, I feel like there's also an opportunity there because they may be looking for opportunities to engage or to volunteer. They have time now, right?
Most definitely.
That's one way to think about it as we target our outreach is, you know, give them ways to actively participate and give them a purpose. So just thinking about how are their values might be different because of their age. For example, talking about the next generation, talking about grandchildren, creating programming where grandparents and grandchildren can participate together. You know, that becomes a very important part of their life. So I think talking about that legacy and that they can bring in their children, I think could be really useful.
It's a great idea, Katie. Thank you.
I was going to make a comment about maybe approaching it like the cereal companies do with kids with all the advertisements. We could like contract with tapioca pudding companies and sun-kissed prunes and just put some values. Sorry. Anyway, I think maybe there might be a difference. I'm kind of intrigued by the migrants versus the natural increasers. It makes me think that with this older group, we might have two totally different approaches for the retired farmers, let's say, versus the retired professors or business people or just Dane County people who want to move and have their retirement home in the country. And those are two very different demographics, I think, and might need two totally different approaches.
Agreed.
I'm wondering, yeah. So tapioca might work for one and prunes for the other, or it depends. Okay, I'll stop.
I chime in with an idea.
You bet.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I coordinate the Lowry Creek Watershed initiative, and Katie is part of that. And one of the most successful things that we have done is offer one evening a month. We call it Evenings of Field. One evening a month, we host a 2-hour field trip on a property in the watershed, and offered a variety of different topics, but we also always make sure that the last half hour is devoted to just socializing. And through this, we've developed a really nice core community of mostly retirees, but not all retirees, that love to talk to each other about what they're doing on their land and learning from others about what they're doing. And we provide resources. And so it's just been a wonderful formula. We didn't have it this year, obviously, and we all dearly missed it. But it's a great community building way to do outreach and just to build networks. So thought I'd throw that in.
Thanks, Barb.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. While some of these conservation issues are big and we need to think on a national and global level, there's also so much opportunity for neighborhood conservation and watershed-based projects where we can help people meet their neighbors and maybe share ideas and eventually maybe share management practices or things like that. That could be really effective on that small scale. I mean, I've definitely met some of neighbors in my township that I would not have met without the field trip that I went on. So I think that's a great idea, Barb, to expand that model a little bit.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I want to thank everybody for this conversation. This is really valuable. So I'm primarily a forestry educator for UW Extension, and so I work a lot with woodland owners throughout the state, and I think statewide the demographics of that group is similar to kind of what was shown here about kind of the aging demographics, and thinking about ways to reach them, specifically reaching out to farmers who may not have time to do some of the management practices that we would be looking for in some of these natural areas. I'm thinking about ways to connect some of these aging landowners with younger people who maybe are looking for access to land. One thing that's been brought up is access to hunting rights in exchange for work, where the landowner doesn't get into some of those issues, liability issues around exchange of money. There's a lot of interest among young farmers, maybe in typical forest products, so non-timber forest products that, exchange for access to a piece of land in exchange for some type of conservation work. I'm curious if anybody's explored that or seen that model work.
We've done that at a preserve I used to work at back in the day, where people wouldn't get a hunting permit unless they put in so many hours of work. So I don't see why that couldn't work for a private landowner too. I think that's a great idea.
Well, and I'll just add that there is this new, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's a grazing network type of thing that's trying to match up folks with land and folks who have cattle to graze. And you can imagine expanding that to be broader than just grazing.
The Midwest Grazing Exchange. I'll find a link and put it in the chat box.
I knew Laura would come to my rescue.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Laura.
Barry, I have a question. If I heard right, you were talking about Lafayette County and having a relatively younger skew in the population. Did you say that that might have to do with younger families and immigrant families, or does that relate to farm labor?
Correct.
Is there any trend towards interest in land ownership among that population, rural land management?
So I don't know, and it would be interesting to do some research in that area. But yes, that increase, you hit it correctly, is the Latino population. It is farm labor, but it's not all farm labor. I know that I'm trying to think of the big cheese firm that is there. Is it Lactalis? No. What is it? Katie, do you know what would be the big cheese operation down in Lafayette County? I can't think of what it is, but anyways, I know that there's a fair amount that work there as well. And I want to say there's one other one, but I'd say the majority of it is farm labor. And I'm guessing that that they would probably all love to own some land and be a part of that. Some of the problems come with, I'm sure, whether they're legal immigrants or illegal immigrants, and some of those types of things that go along with that would probably be very much hurdles for owning any type of property. But it's certainly something that should be looked at.
Well, just a comment on that. Like years ago, I worked in California with an organic farm business incubator that was mainly immigrant farmers looking to create their own businesses. And this was in ultra high land value region where land prices and access was by far the biggest barrier. Relative to that, Southwest Wisconsin looks almost dirt cheap. I know that's not the reality on incomes people make, but it is an asset relative, at least, to other situations, where land management and grazing as a management intensive, lower capital practice might have a fit there.
Yep. Thanks, Craig.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. Sorry to cut it off a little bit, but we got about 3 minutes till the next session. I know Barry has to pop off to get them started. So again, this was recorded. It will be on the website if you want to come back and check out the information. And thanks again, Barry and everybody, and we'll hopefully see you in the next session.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Barry.